All right, guys, welcome to a very informal conversation with me, Pranab, and Jess. We thought it would be good to just put out a nice conversation where we move through a lot of topics surrounding Radiance, Ayurveda, me and Jess and our backgrounds, and Pranab's experience in participating in the first cohort of our program. And yeah, super informal, free flowing. Let's do it.
Nice. Cool. Let's get into it. Cool. Well, I'll start with Jess. So what is your background and story? Because I know that, yeah, as I was like talking to Kush in the beginning, he hyped you up a lot, and I feel like the hype has led to has you've met the expectations in working with you. But I would just love to know kind of more about kind of like your background, how you got into Ayurveda. Um, yeah, and it sounds like you also work as a data engineer, which I was curious about. But yeah, wanted to learn more about all that.
That was in a lifetime long, long ago, but
Hmm.
now I get to live vicariously through you guys, okay? Which has been great, getting to work with young folks that are in the computer world and tech and IT and all that, because we're like-minded, even though we may not realize it. I say that I got into Ayurveda by accident almost, but I originally started in databases when I was in high school, and that turned out to be a very fun and lucrative career early on. But by the time I was 21, I had my first midlife crisis, and I said, enough, I don't want to sit in front of the screen all day, and yet here I am. After quite a bit of traveling, like I went and I lived in Santa Barbara for about a year, drove all the way around the country around in circles and came back again, and then ended up moving to Mexico, lived there for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. I came back to Boston, and a good friend of mine told me about Ayurveda. His son was studying in India, and his son unfortunately didn't make it all the way through, but I thought, hey, sounds like a great thing. I'll go live in India for 6 years. Sure, why not? Sign me up. So basically just saved all my money working in a consulting job for 2 years prior to that, and was able to get over there and stay. Some of my motivations, I think, really came from seeing a woman who was a Tibetan doctor in Boston. She was incredible. She was one of the first women to go through formal training in the Mincy Kong Institute in Dharamshala in India, and she was for a short time one of the physicians to the Dalai Lama. And she
Oh,
traveled all around the world. She'd pack up all her medicines in the suitcase and they'd ferry her off somewhere, and she'd just sit there and read people's nadis, do the pulse diagnosis, and boom, boom, boom. And I thought that was just the coolest lifestyle I could ever imagine.
that's cool. Did you have much exposure to holistic health or even Ayurveda at all, or Tibetan medicine before? Like, how was that kind of just that kind of happened on its own over like the course of your travels and explorations?
It did, but I always had a natural affinity towards wanting to find things that were of traditional nature. Like the
Hmm.
question always came to me, how is it that people could have lived here for hundreds of thousands of years and we didn't figure this out yet, right?
Yeah.
Why are people so
Yeah.
sick today? Why are all these problems the way that they are today? How would people have dealt with it in the past? And like, what are we missing, basically?
Cool.
Was
Yeah,
there any
nutrition
connection to
especially
like
seems like, go ahead.
I was gonna ask if there's any connection to like yoga, because I remember you were pretty into yoga when you were younger as well, and like did Iyengar yoga, and yeah, how did that connect in?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, one of my teachers, so one of the places that I lived after I moved out at kind of a young age as well, I lived with a family outside Harvard Square on Fresh Palm Parkway, and they were absolutely wonderful. I went over there, they had a 3-year-old kid, and he's jumping up and down on the couch. Today he works at Google, and he's like 6.5 feet tall. But the dad, he was one of the first students of BKS Iyengar, and so he traveled to India regularly in the 60s. He and Patricia Walden were travel buddies. And so I basically somehow miraculously, thanks to Craigslist, found them, lived with them on and off for 2 years. And he was my yoga teacher. And this guy knew his stuff inside and out. And so at a very early age, I was lucky to get kind of indoctrinated with very strict yogic principles and like asana practice from, he's a computer engineer too. And so it was
Hmm.
very much a like-minded approach.
That's
Um,
cool.
so
Do you,
yeah,
yeah, do you feel like the traditional approach ever conflicted with kind of like the computer brain approach at all in your life, or not really?
never. If
Cool.
anything, having that structure from, this type of career in tech, made all of that much more feasible. And I think it actually allowed me to go deeper into those things, whereas other folks who are more in kind of like the artsy kind of space, they're not really able to access the complexity and I'd say the inner dimensions of how deep a lot of the stuff really is.
That's cool. Yeah. Awesome. So when you went to India, what was that like? And how did you know who to trust, or how did you learn what was effective, and how did you get into kind of the deep end of Ayurveda? Because, growing up like first and a half generation Indian, like some of the stuff around it has just been exposed through upbringing, but it's hard to know what comes from where and why and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thankfully they drill that into us in school. So I did the, Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery, 5.5-year full-time degree, minimum level of Ayurvedic education to practice in India. So it's about 8,000 hours. And you sit there and you read all of these books over and over and over again, and then some more. And so it's giving you that foundation of where everything comes from and the legitimacy of it. I was also kind of lucky to be a little bit persistent in terms of making the most out of my education while I was there. So I tried to get into the hospitals as early as possible. I tried to make medicines at home. I tried to participate in the whole thing wherever I could. And that gave me a lot more experience earlier than I'd say most other students got. And it made a huge difference. I also, unfortunately, got really sick within the first 3 months of being there because the climate, the pollution, the food, just the spiciness, green chilies 3 days or 3 times a day rather, didn't quite sit well with me. And so that took a little bit of work, and all this Panchakarma stuff ended up being my real savior, so to speak, while I was there. I did Virachana probably 6 or 7 times while I was in India over the course of about 8 years. And so I was doing Virachana every single year.
Could you define some of those? Like Rachana, Panchakarma, maybe eventually we'll get to a definition of Ayurveda, but I don't know if you want to get that now too.
So Panchakarma are these complex detox sort of procedures. We typically need to have a patient as, admitted into a hospital or a clinic to undergo the whole procedure properly and safely. It's very complex, but it basically takes the waste products or the doshas and sequesters them safely and then eliminates them from their nearest route of exit. And so one of the 5 procedures would be better than the other 4, depending on where the doshas are physically located in the body and how we want to facilitate their elimination. So the Virachana one tends to be the easiest because it's basically eliminating in the downward route, meaning through purgation. And so that is handled a little better than the opposite of that, which is coming from the upward route, which is inducing emesis or vomiting. And that's a pretty intense one. I've never personally done that one, but.
Cool. Yeah. What about, it seems like there's this like in those 6 years, what was kind of most surprising for you? Or like, what was that like? And how did your own relationship with Ayurveda change over the course of that time?
Yeah, thankfully I was pushed in the right direction before I even left the US, that don't waste your time with schools in the US. Go, if you really want to learn this thing, you need to go to India. There's no other way. And so I never had any thought of I should go back there and try to do it there, thankfully. I even brought some of the books that you get easily in the US with me, thinking, oh, hey, I have something in English, maybe that's going to help. And I would look at that compared to what we had to do in the syllabus, and there was absolutely no commonality between the two, which is frightening.
Was it just kind of like wrong information, or is it displayed differently? Yeah. How would you kind of characterize the difference in Ayurvedic education between the two?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot gets lost in translation. And, translators are sort of given this certain license to interpret things in a way which may not be as strict to what the original meaning is. And I think that's what's happened with the dilution of Ayurveda in most of the US. It's very rare that you find strict adherence to Ayurveda as a medical system superimposed over, its spiritual pursuits, which are also important, but they're definitely not the #1 goal, as it seems here.
Are there any examples of the most egregious or kind of just the most obvious things of like, if you have a read on like mainstream Ayurveda in America, as much as there is a mainstream Ayurveda compared to kind of like your educational foundations?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of myths and misconceptions. Like Ayurveda is vegetarian. It's a totally spiritual science, right? And it's about meditating and doing pranayama every day and that whole, leading a lifestyle of brahmacharya, not having intimate relationships with people and things like that. All of that is completely false.
Oh, the
And that
Prakriti.
has,
I thought that's one of the
yeah,
big conceptions.
Prakriti is a big misconception too, that everybody has this unique innate stamp or their DNA, so to speak, and that everything revolves around that.
Yeah, I would say that's like, if I think Ayurveda, I think dosha types. That's like the one thing that like everyone asks. Oh, that's really interesting. Can you go into that a bit? Like, how is that not as much maybe? Yeah, could you talk about that? Maybe some of the misconceptions there.
Yeah, the thing about the doshas is that all of them are there all the time. And
Hmm.
so getting hyperfixated on one now causes you to lose your ability to watch the others. And so you're setting yourself up for a dangerous proposition on that. These things like food lists that have become very popular. If you're a Vata person, eat this stuff, don't eat that stuff, and forever it should be.
Yep.
That's going to end a person in a state of ill health.
Hmm.
When I first started getting into Ayurveda and I was reading the popular books, I remember my lunches would be like quinoa with like 10 sweet potatoes because they're earthy vegetables and they're supposed to combat vata. And I put in like 3 tablespoons of ghee, and this stuff would be disgusting. Like, I'm so sad that I was eating it, but that's what you do when you like kind of follow the like, oh, I'm vata, I should be like following what vata person does. And yeah, it's very different than I feel like what Jess has showed me.
Yeah, and it ties
Cool.
into like the no meat thing too, right? It's supposed to be vegetarian, whereas actually one of the best medicines for Vata described in classical literature is meat.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, could
Yeah.
you get into like I'm sure there's a lot of maybe details. It's cool to hear some of them. Could you get into kind of like the theory or the view that's more useful in your opinion? Or I mean maybe it's hard to incorporate all of that, but it's okay if it's less emphasized in the dosha types or just you are this dosha type like a personality quiz. What is it more emphasized on? Or what is kind of some of the way to think about Ayurveda in a healthier way or more realistic way?
It's actually very simple. Check it out. It's about what is your state of health right now, knowing that this change is always happening. We will never stop changing until we die. Right? So if we can get good at watching what this change looks like and saying, oh, it tipped a little bit this way today, and let me bring it back. It tipped a little bit that way, and let me bring it back, right? This is constant juggling act or balancing game in a way. That's when you really learn how to manage yourself long term. And so taking that mindset and then applying it to, let's say, metabolism, which thankfully is now such a well-known topic. People know like insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction, right? And heading off in that direction, that actually is the prerequisite for starting chronic disease, even in Ayurveda. And that's probably going to be compared to or comparable to this concept called ama, which is incompletely or undigested metabolic waste products or toxins. It's most likely also going to include hyper states of blood glucose or exacerbated states of blood glucose and insufficient insulin response to that, and the inability of the body to manage that insulin response. So being in the state of ama will prevent us from actually reinstating proper health. So the most important thing to keep an eye on is, where is my current state of health? And are my health switches turned on to create health, or are they turned on to create disease?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's what we've been working with. Like I have my CGM now, and it's been really helpful as a way to kind of validate, like, oh yeah, walking after meals is really great. Which I was doing a program called Levels Health a couple years ago, which was also helpful in that way. But I think in a lot of ways the Ayurvedic system is more complete because it has a history. So I think I also knowing like what to eat from like the suggestion Kush gave me a few months ago is what kind of led me to start the program of just like vegetables and stuff. But anyways, without digressing too much, I'm kind of curious how you would compare this kind of recent modern state of like this focus on metabolic health and hormones with the traditional Ayurveda system? Because it does seem like Ayurveda, in a lot of ways, figured a lot of that out. The way you described kind of how it categorized the stages towards diabetes and things like that. But would love to hear you talk about that.
That's the brilliant thing about it, man. Like I went in first year and I asked one of my teachers in the matter of just a few weeks or a few months, I said, how did they figure this out? How did they come to know all of this way back in the day? They didn't have any computers. They didn't have any tools. You know what I mean? They're not like crunching numbers on a calculator or anything like that. How did they do this? And she gave me kind of that sort of answer that was a little disappointing, that they sat in a cave and it came to them when they were meditating. I was like, come on, dude. But you know, having this level of attention and awareness, I think we all have it in us to attune our intuitive power to know, is this thing right? Is this thing wrong? Does this feel good when I eat it or do it? Does this feel bad when I eat it or do it? And yeah, there's sometimes very blurry lines in that. It may be a pathological response. It may be out of doing the wrong habits for years and decades at a time that we end up pointed towards the wrong response. But with the retraining that goes into all of this and saying, hey, no, you want to encourage feeling tired to go to bed when you feel tired between 8 and 10 p.m. Right? That's human nature. And that is going to link up your circadian rhythm to the other side so you can wake up at the right time. And so the beautiful things then in classical literature, all of these recommendations are scattered throughout the text. Go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. And doing that naturally is one of the best signs of a person who has natural regenerative capacity. And so there are certain kind of signs and symptoms or characteristic features that we find, and we know what to expect if a person's in a state of health, if they're not in a state of health, if they're deviating into a certain kind of disease, and what flavor is that going to be? Is it more pronounced with Vata, Pitta, or Kapha? How progressed is it? How deep has it gone into the body? And so we have like guidance on all that straight out of these books from 3,000 years ago.
That's cool. Yeah. What do you feel has been kind of the most unique parts of Ayurveda that clients have kind of appreciated? Or, or actually, could you go into a bit more of like how many people you've worked with over the years and kind of, how many people you worked with over the years, like what changes they've seen, and then what aspects of the system they might have enjoyed the most?
Awesome. Yeah. So I basically started with people around 2010, even when I was still in school, because of course we're doing our rotations in the hospital, we're going into internship, and so we're starting to get exposure to patients on that level. And then during my internship, I went and kind of started my own Panchakarma clinic because I wanted to finally be able to have patients that spoke English and I could communicate with them. And so I had a lot of folks come from 15, 20 different countries and stay with me for anywhere from like 1 to 5 or 6 weeks, and be able to actually work with them doing the appropriate types of treatments and medicines and foods and all of that, super customized. And, over the years, I've seen varying numbers over the years because I've had professional students and trying to put together the school and all that stuff. But, all in all, I would say the best thing I like to hear from people is, thank you, you gave me my life back. And that's just, time and time again. I just had another woman say that to me yesterday or the day before. Yesterday, I think it was. And it takes time, though. People are very sick and they never expect that they can get out of it. So not only is it a physical entrapment, but their minds are really stuck in this state of like total despair. And being able to use Ayurveda in this way, slowly, methodically, or quickly if they're able to keep up with it, but most people honestly are better to go at a slower pace, and let it really seep into their being, and let them make those changes and make them permanently. That's how they get their life back. And now they think, wow, I have another 40 years to go. I can actually enjoy this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, what I liked about it is the emphasis on habit change and also just like somatic understanding. Knowing when I'm full and really paying attention to when am I actually full and when am I overstuffing myself? Because it's something over the last many, many years, I just don't pay attention to, and I don't have a reason. It's even though I've been meditating for a bunch of years at this point and been doing retreat, it's still a thing to like put attention to, like with intention, on the belly, when eating, moment to moment, more deeply. And I think of being able to apply that during the program has been pretty helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, Pranab, you came with some, pretty well presenting types of things going on. And how do you feel now? I mean, of course, you don't have to go into like the
Yeah.
details.
Maybe we can move to talking about me. Yeah.
I'd love to hear from your side, your experience and what you think of all of this, especially in the relatively shorter time frame, because you really have only been doing this for about 6 weeks full on right now.
Yeah, but just a month and a half. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. As you guys both know. So I think yeah, so kind of to paint a picture of like the last year health-wise, I'd say, well, I'd say for many years I've been someone who I've always been like relatively steady health, or it's been kind of steady, but I've never really had any drastic swings. I've never really been able to put on a lot of muscle at once, never really lost a lot of weight at once. I never like gained too much weight at once. It's always been relatively steady, but over the years, kind of steadily gaining pounds. Um, and parts of the quarantine over the pandemic time, I like gained a lot of muscle, maybe lost a little bit depending on working out and stuff. But in this last year, because of a lot of stress, I think I went back into a couple old eating patterns of like going for sweets when times are stressful, and just having probably more cortisol or stress in my body probably was worse for myself. Probably exercised a bit less, sleep quality not as good. So I think it got to this point where my belly felt really big. I felt bloated a lot. Doing DEXA scans, I saw that I had pretty high body fat percentage. And then in terms of pre-diabetes, I had an A1C test, and I hit like around 5.6, 5.7, which is getting into pre-diabetes range. And a couple years before, I was like 5.4, so it was getting definitely worse. These are all things I thought about before. I did the Levels Health program back in 2020, and that was cool. Applied a continuous glucose monitor and got some good insights. But since 2020, kind of lost some of the drive there, or just kind of forgot that I could do all that stuff. And yeah, so just like a few things where I was just like, I really want to just get my health kind of like in a good direction entering late 20s. Like there's still a bunch of time left, but the window of kind of gaining muscle and making sure I have a good foundation felt like it was starting to close. And yeah, I just wanted to really set myself up, especially as I got older, to not need to worry as much. So that's kind of what I came in with. And it was interesting. I talked to Kush a few months prior, just talking to him about this stuff, and also my energy levels. Part of it was stress, so my mood was kind of up and down, but also energy levels. I would like sometimes need to like lie down in the afternoon, or just felt a bit lethargic, and it was hard to differentiate how much of this is like situational, how much of this is emotional and psychosomatic, how much of this is like based on what I'm eating. And it was cool to, and it was, yeah. So I think over the course of the last month and a half, and some of the work prior to, I've been slowly untangling and just getting a lot better. Like I feel like my energy levels have been better than ever before, and not in a way that's like crazy, like I'm on coffee all the time or something, but just very clear. If I actually just look at like my last few weeks compared to the weeks prior, each day it just has a lot more clarity, less heaviness, more like just being able to go about my day in a kind of peaceful, contented kind of way. Um, yeah, and I can go into like what I changed and how that all helped, and how the programs are helping. But yeah, overall, I think like I think it's moving in the right track. Find myself losing some weight. I'm doing a DEXA scan kind of soon to like measure and check. Doing an A1C test kind of soon to measure and check. But yeah, things are kind of moving in the right direction, which is super exciting, especially over the course of like just a month. And I don't think it's something I would have been able to do by myself.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious as to what you said about how you don't think you could have done it yourself. Like, what do you think what were the concrete things from the program that really helped you the most and like got you to that place where you could do it?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like going into the program, I came out of a meditation retreat where I was already like really focused on like my belly sensations and hunger and eating. And during that, I realized I don't even know what hunger feels like. I don't really know what like like what full kind of feels like when do I fast, when do I not? And I think I was just kind of in this thing where I was just like rotating around. Like I look stuff up, right? I know all the information out there, but there's just so many different systems and so many different things that you could do. And like there's all these workout programs and all this food stuff and there's this and there's that. And it's a bit overwhelming. And it was also a thing where like Andrew Huberman's great. He's got protocols. We reference them during our calls, which is awesome. But it's like I wanted something that I also then there's also this whole thread of like wanting to get into like so a lot of that we talked about is touched upon in mindful eating and like somatic eating and kind of just like the more you know awareness side of things, the spiritual-ish side. So it's kind of like I wanted something that blended that desire. Like I wanted something holistic, blended in like somatic experience and my awareness of things and my meditation practice with these kind of like best practices protocols. And those are basically that. It was basically like the right blend of both of it, both of those sides, which I thought was awesome. So yeah, and even though like Ayurveda isn't like necessarily you don't have to be a monk to do it. It does have it's very compatible with a lot of that. So yeah, on my own, I would have probably like still tried to pay attention to what I was eating, but I wouldn't have been able to really track it or like measure every week how it's going. I also was too spread out everywhere. I wouldn't really have a plan or a set of things to do. I wouldn't really know what to work on one, two, and three. And I think working with Jess, what's been really great was yeah, going in, like I think all the stuff that I have, it seemed like it was pretty straightforward from her point of view. And I also just, really enjoyed working with you from the initial consult on. So then I was like, all right, I'm just gonna listen to whatever she says. And I think like, there's a case to be made that if I just did that with any program, it maybe would have worked. And that's maybe true, but I also just there wasn't really anything else that I would have just put my just trust into and just followed. But I think like knowing that it came from this place that like was able to merge both like the analytical plus the intuitional and just like with your background and everything that just made me be like I'll do whatever you say and I've just basically been doing it for the most part and it's been good but I really wouldn't have yeah like I'm like going to bed way earlier and more regularly than I ever used to waking up a lot earlier than I had before more consistently and it just does lead to just a lot more energy throughout the day it makes it so yeah for the first time ever I'm noticing yeah, when I eat regularly, I feel better. It feels cleaner and it sets a foundation. So even if I have deviations, it's not that big of a deal. And it's really cool to see how like things like meal timing actually play a much larger role than I've ever really read about. And I've now with my CGM, I've like noticed that it's true. And it kind of all just kind of works together, which is really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's really hard, I think, to find the consolidation of all of the aspects in life that can have an influence on our state of health, which again is ever changing, right? And then how to be able
Yep.
to tease that out and know, is it this that made me not feel so well today? Is it that thing? Is it the combination of them? And so I think when we have our sessions and we try to like reduce things into what went well, what didn't go well, and kind of play the little investigation game, we can figure it out. And then that helps you ultimately learn, hey, I don't want to make that choice anymore.
Totally. Yeah, and it's funny, like 2 years ago, I did a program on the fitness side. So it was more fitness focused and then separately kind of had like a meal tracker and stuff. But it just felt like it was very like top down, like you have to do this. It wasn't really flexible with my needs. So part of the program that's validated itself out is like, flexibility. It's not like you have to do this way and only this way. It's like, okay, meeting me where I'm at. I have to travel. I travel to San Francisco probably every few weeks. So it's nice having a system that can apply when I'm traveling and knowing what to do there, while also acknowledging like travel is a big difficulty and like it's going to be a challenge and how do I meet that? Um, and kind of like, so all that's been pretty helpful. Um, yeah, and also yeah, and just like lots of different parts of it. So just like from the mindful eating, yeah, a big learning is just realizing how constipated I was. I just had no idea with that before doing like some of the tracking work on the outflows. Just like, oh wow, this makes a huge difference, and this is something like no one talks about in Western culture. Um, so yeah, it's good stuff.
Someday you'll do Virachana. Just wait.
Yeah, one of these days. One of these days. Yeah,
So
yeah, and then yeah, maybe we should also talk about the tracker. So like it's nice having like this like big gigantic spreadsheet of like all the things I can think about. And it's cool because even knowing that exists knows it like on one side it can be a little overwhelming, but on the other side I just let go of the stuff that I'm not focused on and then I can see like, okay, for the next few weeks I'm just focused on these and I can like fill that out. And the tracker, it's cool because the tracker is meant for me to increase my awareness of those things while also being like actually honest about what's working or not. Because if you don't track stuff, you don't really know what's happening. You can kind of just even like, there were a few days I missed it, and I was like, wait, what did happen there? I don't really know. But then actually seeing the numbers over the last few weeks is really satisfying because I can see like, oh, actually, I did go to bed around this time. I can use my Aura ring, which yeah, to like upload my data there, and I can kind of see it all in one place with like sleep data, now CGM data, like once I put in my DEXA scan stuff, that's all in there, plus just like everything. So it's cool to have like a be able to be able to spend the time a little more than I would to like really build these foundations. And even like on Sunday, I went to a Super Bowl party and ate a bunch of stuff that's like kind of junk food, but then like it was fine, just because I had the foundation already set. So it's not like this thing where I can never eat unhealthy ever again. It's just like, this foundation of this basis of like health allows everything else to happen, which I can see.
exactly. Yeah, it kind of can be a little dangerous because you can learn what, your limits are and be like, oh, I'll just get right up to the edge
Yeah,
there. But
yeah,
hey, man, that's living life at the same time. And I never want to tell anybody, oh, no, you can't have ice cream ever again. You can't have coffee ever. Come on, that's ridiculous. You're
yep,
going to go out and enjoy these things as you should and go out with your friends and have a good time. There's going to be nights where everybody stays up. Who knows
yep,
how long? All right. It's going to happen. But if you have those principles where you can say, okay, now I'm going to go back and make sure everything's stable, you avoid getting sick. You avoid the downtime, you avoid the hassle and the suffering of it, right?
yep, for sure,
Both short and long term.
for sure. So it's been cool to see and excited to see. It's only halfway through, so I'm excited to see how it'll be the next half, just to keep going with it.
Yeah, and it's great that you're tracking more because you'll see when you do get to the end, that's what you're going to have to take away from this and look at it and say,
Yeah,
wow, I can see for myself when I did this, this is the result. Now
yeah,
and you can better plan your days.
100%.
Yeah. Overall, I'm curious.
Cool.
Do you feel like there's like particular aspects of the program and outcomes that for friends around you, you feel would be beneficial? Like you see people and you're like, oh, you could use this, you could use that, you could use that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the big one is just because I'm so deep into the meditation space, I think just a lot of meditators could probably like a lot of people I know talk about as you start meditating more, increase sensory clarity, you notice how all these foods are just like bad for you and like not and kind of like poisonous. Not poisonous, it's a bit extreme, but just like cause lethargy and cause bloating and you get a sense of like it not being that great for you. But there's not really a solution to that. There's kind of this like, oh, let me try being gluten free. Let me try doing this. Let me try doing that. And I mean, that's probably good, but it's pretty stressful, honestly. Yeah, and
It's
maybe
it's
there's
not
some challenges to
it's
it,
not
and it's
good
not good.
actually. It's not good.
Yeah, we talked about the gluten free thing, which was interesting, especially with um, glycemic levels. So yeah, yeah. So I just sense that like it just seems like it's nice to have just like a structured thing that's also personalized. So the tricky thing is like I probably wouldn't be able to learn this on my own, but the cool thing is like now I'm able to like interface in a way that I can trust and just like get into it, um, which is cool.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the meditator idea because I think a lot of those people are already trained to
Yeah,
hold their awareness, right? And they want to know the answers. And this would be such a wonderful, huge chunk. I mean, this is like meditating in the gross world,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
it really is bringing my practice the rest of my life, which is kind of the theme that I wanted to have for the year. So this program's been like a really big part of that.
Awesome.
And then second, like a bunch of friends are into the quantified self thing, like having aura rings and trackers and CGMs and all that. And there, I think it's like that's also really helpful, but you may not be as grounded in kind of the somatic side. It's easy to just to trust the data and not get into your intuitions about things. And also, there's not necessarily like best practices or kind of like a foundation. And it can be easy to kind of like, yeah, just not be as grounded, if that makes sense, when doing that stuff. So it's kind of a good mix, I would say.
Are there any things about the program that you think would be helpful to improve on, or what can we kind of start doing better? How can we build it out to make it easier?
Yeah, I think we're on the right track. I think if like, yeah, if anything, just like the nerd part of my brain wants to just learn about other people, or just not other people's stuff, but just kind of like how this could be different depending on the person and the kind of the personalization aspects of it. But yeah, I think it's like overall, I feel pretty good about it. It's been nice. Like, tracking and starting a new habit in general is difficult, but that's just a thing to kind of like work with. And yeah, maybe do you want to move towards the science aspect? I'd be curious to learn more from Kush around that.
We do it, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Yeah, so kind of in that, yeah, how did you kind of how do you think about radiance and just this Ayurveda, like Ayurveda and everything in regards to somatic awareness around food and well-being?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think like you said, there's kind of a missing piece that Ayurveda provides in the whole realm of creating somatic awareness around your food and your well-being and your mood and your health. I think systems like meditation, they increase your sensory clarity so you actually understand what's going on inside your body. But it's actually not true that you can understand what's healthy for you just by intuiting based on looking inside your body. You do need an intellectual framework to help you connect the dots. You need an intellectual framework to help you connect the dots between I ate this at 1 p.m. and at 6 p.m. I felt this way and my sleep was this way. That's probably because of that. And I think that Ayurveda is that system. I think one thing that makes Ayurveda pretty different from the Western biomedical system, that the Western biomedical system mostly uses objective measurements and sort of looks outside in to try to diagnose. So if you have some kind of condition, you might go to the doctor and they'll look at some of your symptoms, but their primary way of diagnosing you will be looking at a lot of lab tests. And that's extremely helpful because they can catch stuff that no one else would have caught. But if you want a system that'll tell you if you feel this way and then this way and this way, if you feel hot on your arm and you get itchy and you want to go to sleep, then do this. I think that Ayurveda is that system. So it's kind of like the inner science of health and wellness, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think there were a lot of aspects that I hadn't even thought about, or like hot, cold, itchy. Like we emphasize like during so far, I've only really talked about like the heaviness, lightness aspect, but that was just only one small part of the thing, which I think the screener that you guys have, that itself gave value. Like that itself was helpful to know, like, these are things you can think about, these are things you can look for. Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, do you feel like because there's a way of it being so systematic, it seems like how do you view it from like an epistemological lens or from like a scientific lens? Like how do you kind of go from being a skeptic about it, like me growing up here and being like, that stuff's kind of weird,
Yeah.
to like believing in it and like being so invested in it.
Yeah.
And your thoughts around it as like a science, potentially.
Totally. That's a really good question. I think the initial beginnings of belief in it actually happened out of skepticism from the existing Western medical system. So I was in biotech for a while and I was really involved in the longevity space, life extension, so on and so forth. And I was always like, for many years, I was like a biohacker type. It's like, how do I become the healthiest possible person? How do I do what's going to get me the most vitality, the most energy? And kind of there's like a fundamental question at the core of that, which is, what should I eat? And like it was kind of funny. I would sit in like a room at a biotech company with a bunch of PhD scientists and we would argue about like very basic facts about like what you should eat, and it was clear that no one like actually knew. Like no one had the actual answer. And so after seeing that, I started reading some popular books about Ayurveda, and I was like, oh, okay, like you guys at least seem to have like a system for what should you eat. Like it's a philosophically consistent system. um, but you can look at a philosophically consistent system and it can be false. Like it can spit out false results. And so it has to actually be empirically valid. Um, and that process for me was a pretty long period of conversion where like I was at times I'd be like, is this actually just fake? Like, have I duped myself? Some of I'd say there were like two or three really prominent things that made me go like, oh no, this is for real. So there's research that's been conducted in India, clinical trials in India, but like coming from a scientific background, I kind of knew people don't really trust science that comes out of India. So I was like, okay, good. You guys are saying stuff. That's great. But Germany, for some reason, I don't know why, it's 5 or 10 years ahead of the US, and they have Ayurveda there. Like the biggest medical university in Germany has an Ayurveda research department and hospital wing.
Wow.
And they've been spitting out a few high quality clinical trials in the last like 5-ish years. And they've done two, and both of those clinical trials compared Ayurveda head to head against the sort of state of the art Western medical treatment for a particular disease. And the two diseases they looked at were irritable bowel syndrome and osteoarthritis. And for both of those diseases, Ayurveda significantly outperformed the Western standard of care. And so, like, I looked at that and I was like, this is high quality evidence that shows that this system can actually treat disease empirically to a degree, in some cases, outperforming Western medicine. It's like, okay, like from an epistemological perspective, you look at a philosophically consistent system that is spitting out empirically valid results, and you're like, okay, this whole system probably works.
Yeah.
And there's some more scientific evidence that I think will be coming out in the next few years. Like Parkinson's disease is another place where Western medicine can't really do much. Like they can't slow or stop the progression of the disease. And I've seen evidence that Ayurveda can actually halt the progression of the disease and move it backwards, which is like unheard of. And so I saw that too, and I was like, well, okay.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
because I think there's a big desire to move towards something that's more holistic than the typical allopathic system. And I think there's a kind of rise in culture or increased awareness in culture around it being more for point solutions and less for full body health, and why, like, stuff that's like a 3 to a 5 out of 10 pain doesn't really get addressed often. It's just always there, like around IBS and chronic pain and things like that. And a lot of people seem to move towards functional health solutions, but there aren't that many solutions. Like we're both on Twitter, we see a lot of like there's like Ray Peat, and then there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and it's hard to really assess. Is the potato diet better than the ice cream diet? Is better than carnivore or whatever? And they're all kind of, yeah. So it's like it's nice to hear from you, like getting into like the fact that you've like dove into it and wrestled with kind of like the pros and cons and kind of belief, disbelief. Like it, to me, that there's a sense that there's a bit more of a foundation there than just kind of like a new fad, the fact that it's traditional, it is Lindy. There's something there that's pretty helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think especially to like I also come from a meditation background. I feel like for a lot of people that meditate, like we've had the insight that, oh, Buddhism is a system that's been around for thousands of years and is spitting out valid methodology and results that like the Western psychological system hasn't yet taken in. So that creates this kind of openness. You're like, oh, there's probably other systems that exist like that. And also that kind of also creates the valuation of the traditional systems. So like, oh, they have these vast reservoirs of knowledge that we can tap into.
Right. Yeah, it's really just like it was like finding a doorway into those old systems with kind of this like not just modern lens, but this kind of like more open-minded, like, yeah, it's like an open-minded lens around like, okay, well, can it be explained in this way? Can it be explained in that way? Just knowing all the different ways it could be explained, while also still taking into account like not just throwing out tradition because it's tradition, like knowing like clearly like 2000 years ago you're not going to know what blood glucose is, but they have a different way of talking about it.
Totally. Yeah. And not just like taking their worldview as a thing inside the system rather than being like the worldview either makes the system true or false. Like,
Yeah.
Buddhism makes lots of wacky claims. Ayurveda makes lots of wacky claims. So some of them may be true. You kind of just like set them. You're like, that's your worldview. Let's like test your system.
Totally. That's cool. Yeah, how about you? How'd you, so what like results did you get from getting into Ayurveda? Like how has your process been, and how have things changed as a result of doing all this?
Yeah. That was the last prong that actually really convinced me this stuff was real. I started working with Jess in like July of last year, June or July, and I feel like before that there was all kinds of stuff going on. It actually wasn't really that severe a case. Like Jess was like, yeah, you weren't really that sick, but there was all kinds of stuff that could have turned into pathology. Like I remember I would take a nap 2 hours after breakfast, and then sometimes I'd take a nap like 2 hours after lunch, or like not every day, but I'd like feel a little bit tired and be like, oh yeah, maybe I should go sleep, maybe I'm just under a lot of stress, and like I didn't really know how to connect the dots. But I feel like within 2 weeks of starting to work with Jess, like things were just so much clearer. And then gradually over the period of months, I'd say like pretty quickly my like motivation and focus and energy levels were just significantly higher. And then I think the cool, somewhat unexpected thing is that like my overall levels of emotional stability have just increased and my levels of anxiety have decreased. And I think that's due to two things. I think the kind of just stability of routine and always knowing, like, if I feel a little bit out of balance, I know what I need to do to put myself back into balance. And that's just like extraordinarily helpful compared to kind of, what do I do? What is everything
Yeah.
is everything in my life wrong, or do I actually just need to like eat a slightly lighter breakfast, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Really
The
good.
system aspect of it is so key. That's such a good way of pointing it out. Like the connecting the dots thing. It's like almost all these things we know about in isolation, or it's just like, oh, I have this sleep problem, and it's like, oh, I have this like digestion problem, and I have this thing, and that in a weird way, it's like I kind of it's hard to know. It's hard to know what dots to connect and what dots not to connect. So it's because it's like in some ways you can kind of get into like a conspiratorial mindset if you connect too many dots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And another way it's like you're not actually helping yourself if you just leave them as like, oh, that's just how life is.
Yeah.
So it's this cool thing where it's like a framework that like allows you to actually move towards corrective health, um, reasonably well, and like just in a way that kind of makes sense, which is nice.
I like the
Totally,
way
yeah.
you said that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Because you could almost have too much information, right? Like, is it the microplastics? Is it like the polyester?
yeah,
Or like, is it the glyphosate in the wheat? Like, I don't know.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but then if you have an
Right.
empirical system that just like gives you steps and shows you results, you can just be like, oh, I took the step, I got the result. Cool. That's so sad.
And then think about the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people that live all around the world that are exposed to those things day in and day out.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they like there's conspiracies, but then there's the big picture.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, and it's interesting because like there is still like reality in those, but it's both because like for any individual person, you just want to like know it's good to just have a system and then also just like learn from your own experience. But combining the two is just so good.
Totally. Yeah. It's like having systems that can teach you how to learn from your own experience. I feel like that's the ultimate. Like
Actually,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah, cool. Cool. Well, I think we're at time, so maybe we close out the recording.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
This was
this is
awesome. Thank you,
great.
Pranav, and thank you, Jess,
See ya.
too.
Thanks, Pranab. Thanks,
Yeah,
Kush.
thank you both.